sex talk with my youngest daughter, who is 7 years old. And this is how it happened. So I was putting her to bed, and we were reading the story. We have the Jesus Story Book Bible.
Yes,
excellent book. We're reading the story of Moses, and he's it's when Moses is a baby, and they put him in the stream, and he floats down to Pharaoh's wife, or Pharaoh's daughter. And I'm reading this part, and Millie says, "Dad, how did Moses become a baby?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, I mean, how did he get there?" And I said, "Well, how do you think he got there?" And she said, "Yeah, exactly." Well, what do you think?
That's a good one.
Man, yeah, exactly. Thank you. Now I'm exposed. My kids, they ask these deep questions all the time, and my wife is like, "You're definitely the kids at therapy." So anyways, I said, well, how do you think that he got there? And she said, "I don't know, Dad, I want you to tell me." And I said, we talked before about how mommies and daddies, they come together and they, and they have children together. And because I'm totally unprepared for this conversation, and I'm like sweating, but I'm a counselor. I'm supposed to be able to be prepared for anything in the moment, but this one is just rattling me. Okay, so I'm like, mommies and daddies come together and they have babies, and she said that how do mommies and daddies come together and have babies? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not getting out of this. So I said, well, Millie, maybe you should talk to your mom about this. And she said, "No, Dad, I want you to tell me. I want to know, how does this happen?" She is relentless, and she is our boldest child, And so I said, well, I knew I wasn't getting out of it, and this kind of went on for a little bit. So finally I said, okay, you know how boys have a penis and girls have a vagina? I said, when those two come together, that's how babies get in mommy's tummies. And she looked at me and she goes, "What?" She goes, "Do you and mommy do this?" And I said,
"How did you get
"Yes, we do." And so you can see the wheels turning in her head. And she goes, "How many times have you done it?" And I was like, "Well, Millie, I don't know." And she's like, "Did you do it to have me?" And I said, "Yes, that's how you were born. That's how you were made." And she goes, well, do you do it with your clothes on? And I was like, "No, you have to be naked." And she goes, "That is awesome." I did. I said, "Yes, Millie, it is awesome, but you have to wait till you're married, for that to happen." And she was just so consumed with I can't believe it was this new world that had been opened up to her. She had no idea. And I'm sitting there thinking, man, her teenage years are going to be really tough years, but that's because of my own stuff, right? I immediately go to the negative, I don't want her to think sex is awesome. Because if she thinks it's awesome, she's going to want to do it. So I need to tell her it's bad, so she doesn't want to do it until it's time for her to do it, and then she needs to think it's awesome. Right? Well, that's totally messed up. But that is exactly what we have done with sex in the church for literally thousands of years. Okay? So right now, what I want to talk about, none of this is going to be like offensive kind of stuff. It's just going to be talking about what is the purpose of sex. And I think that childlike fascination with it, the reason I wanted you to hear that story is because that childlike fascination is how God intended us to approach sex. That's what He wanted us to experience, to have that. That is awesome, right? And not because we have great orgasms, but because we have great connection. That is what sex is all about. Okay? So, sex in our culture has a lot of connotations. In biblical times, they would refer to a man knowing a woman. And that phrase meant that they had sexual intimacy. Okay? That connection that happened between them was referred to as knowing. Which fits right in line with what our theme of the weekend is, knowing and being known, right? Making connections. And I think that's an important point that, like, the idea of physical intimacy, of two people coming together to be known, is a representation of what's already happening emotionally and spiritually between two people. That is the core-to-core relationship, okay? The difficulty comes in when our cultural perspective of sex enters the scene. So what happened here? Okay, well, back in the late 1800s, there were people who most people had a view of sex that was very restrictive, and at that point it had come all the way down the line, starting from the 2nd century. Up to the late 1800s, early 1900s, a idea of sex that it was only for procreation, and that pleasure during sex meant that there was potentially something wrong with the sexual encounter, because it was supposed to be devoid of this pleasure. So then, as you move towards the early 1900s, you start to the sexual revolution, which actually didn't happen until the 60s, but it starts to get some people in the movement who start pushing things towards a sexual revolution. Except these people are not doing it from a Christian perspective. They start to say that sex is not just about procreation, that we're robbing ourselves of the enjoyment that should be experienced. And in the 40s, a man named Kinsey, his last name was Kinsey, he started working in this space, but he was a very immoral guy. I won't go into all the details, but the Kinsey reports are really a popular, they're in sex therapy and in like contexts where people teach on sex. They typically rely on that literature, some of the hallmark literature that shifted people's thinking towards sexuality and what it is in our current day. And what Kinsey said was that people are all oriented towards deviant forms of sex, and that we are constantly restricting ourselves from that. And remember, some of this started with Freud as well. That sexual impulses were very involved in people's psychoses and things like that. But Kinsey said that we're withholding our impulses and we need to stop doing that, essentially. And he gave a lot of research, which was tainted research, that shifted the academic community towards supporting this idea that erotic sex is the most fulfilling way to have sex. Okay? Now, Kinsey was funded by people like Playboy magazine and other pornography, like Hustler magazine. They wanted this research funded. Why? Because it supported the literature that they're putting out into the public. Okay? So in the 60s, following a lot of this happening, you have the sexual revolution, where you have things like Woodstock, where people are having sex with anyone and everyone, right? And these kind of things take off as a popular way to do sex, that we are now enjoying our bodies and we're experiencing freedom from the old religious ways, and now we're entering into a new era where we can explore sex in whatever way we see fit. And we see the ripple effect of that happening even into our current day. Now, also, in the late 90s and early 2000s, what came on the scene? Internet. Yes. What did you say?
I thought it was more than
Oh, well, it did take off in the 80s and early 90s. But yeah, the internet, the onset of the internet, then made pornography available in a very private way. And it continued to push the envelope of what people were looking for and creating a sexual appetite for those kinds of images. Okay? So the reason I walk you through that, and to let you know, is because today, where we find ourselves is likely this concept that either sex is taboo because we don't want to be like the rest of the world, so it's taboo to talk about. Not only is it taboo to talk about, but we keep it very restrictive. It's not playful. It's just, hey, let's go and get things done in the bedroom and that be it. Or we lean more towards how our culture sees it, and that is, hey, we're pursuing the most erotic experience that we can have in the bedroom. Okay? And I would say neither one of those is where we need to find ourselves, because sex is not about either of those things. It's not about being restrictive, and it's not about experiencing the most erotic thing ever. Because when you do that, it's an insatiable desire for more. So I think that people need to be playful, but I don't think that they need to think, okay, we're chasing this feeling rather than we're chasing something else that's more important. And I would say what we need to be looking for is oneness. Okay? That connection, that sex becomes the physical, like I said earlier, the physical representation of what's happening between us already. And when we come together, that we seek that connection. And it really is not about the feeling as much as it is about the connecting. Okay? Now, feeling is God's like icing on the cake for us, I think, right? Like that is something very beautiful and special that God gives us, that makes us, that is enjoyable, and it makes us want to come back to have sex more often. But over time, the feelings change, and the nature of sex will change. This is, early in your marriage, they say, if the first year of your marriage, you were to put a penny in a jar every time you had sex, that for the rest of your marriage, if you took one out, every time you had sex, you'd still have money left over by the end. And that's because sex is easy and fun and great in the beginning, but then you start to really experience some conflict, you introduce kids into the mix, all of that creates less and less space for the moment to happen, right? So I think that there are so many messages that come at us, but they don't take a holy view of sex, right? And we're constantly bombarded with either trying to avoid the topic, or we don't avoid it, but what we do learn about it happens in secret. Sex is something that the church has been afraid to talk about for a long time. I teach sex therapy for Artie, and every time I teach it, my students say, "Why did I not hear this at church? Why did my parents not tell me this stuff?" And I think it's because for a long time we just haven't known how to respond to the cultural wave and where it's taking us. Okay? So I'm going to stop there. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts they want to throw out there? Are the walls swinging yet?
Well, I think that last phrase you just said, this idea of why haven't we seen or experienced it in the church or with the parents, and I think like a lot of things that scare us about culture, we tend to swing the pendulum in the opposite direction. So if our culture is saturated in sex and talking about that, then our Christian duty and responsibility is to react and not say anything.
Yeah.
Overcompensating.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, our preacher over on this similarly, on public cards, someone has been about not mentioning sex or something during a sermon because it was like 7 or 8 girls, which, that's uncomfortable, but if we can't, like, we're seeing it already on TV and ads and everything else, so if we can't say anything at all in a positive light, then
You're right. Yeah, that's the big problem is I think we're afraid, like, oh man, if we bring up sex in the next company, like, we're going to say something that somebody's going to be offended by. And we got to be really careful with that. But what that should be an alarm bell for us, because when we keep it secret or when we don't talk about it, what happens to the topic?
You're left to find your information differently.
That's right. From a world that's going to feed you this idea that, like, hey, whatever you want, whatever you feed, whatever feels good to you, go for it. That's what you need to look for. It's that obey your thirst, Sprite commercial, like whatever's good, go for it. But it stays in the dark. It stays in the dark, and what that does is it communicates that sex is bad. So not only does it communicate that with us, like, oh, I better not talk about this because it's gonna offend somebody, but it also communicates that to our kids and the people that are around us. Okay? I would say pornography and infidelity also have a part to play in how we approach our partner through sexual contact. Pornography, I know I've talked about this some already, pornography is very dangerous for a number of reasons. I would say the biggest one is this. Objectification. What I mean by objectification is that it takes the humanity out of somebody and makes them an object of our pleasure. Okay? So it's like I'm viewing these images on a computer screen and I'm consuming them. Like I would consume another product. Right? And in that consuming of these images, then I get pleasure from it, and I connect pleasure with fantasy. What I'm consuming is the fantasy, right? And I'm using the images to create the fantasy. So if that's happening, then I'm dehumanizing the person that I'm looking at. And if I do that through a computer screen, then I'm also going to do that in my everyday life. What does that look like? And here's another part of that. I don't think you have to be viewing pornography for this to become an issue in your relationship. I think it can become an issue in your relationship through any means of consuming the fantasy and not being satisfied with the reality. So when we objectify people, though, men or women, we end up giving them, we dehumanize them, like I said before, And if we dehumanize them, then we set up the expectation that they are here for my satisfaction. So I practice going to those images, or I'm constantly looking at other women, and I'm consuming them in this fantasy world, and now I start to see people that they exist for my satisfaction. And where will we see this impact life the most? In the bedroom. If this gets carried into the bedroom, and my spouse exists for my satisfaction, then we will not be able to have that oneness that we're talking about. It will be about them bringing me to my fantasy pleasure place. Okay? And they're not, and we are therefore dehumanizing them. They are an object in that way. Is this making sense? Okay.
You said you were besides pornography, you said there were other things that lead to that, or what are other things that can lead you down that road that you should be careful?
Yeah, so I think excessive internet use, gaming, is another way that we end up dehumanizing people, like through violence and things like that. Social media, I think, can create a separation from the human connection. So I would say those are some of the main things that I would think about when it comes to ways that we dehumanize people, and we begin this objectification process. But somebody can say something? No? But all of it kind of drives us towards separation and hiding. So objectification is about hiding in a world that feels better than this one. Because in this world, people do what I want. People do what I say. So I'm hiding. I do think that some of this is just part of our brokenness as human beings. It's just part of our fallen nature. And it's important to note that it happens. Right? Like we may experience this and be like, but I'm not looking at pornography, I'm not addicted to gaming and all that, so I don't know what to do. The idea is just awareness, being aware that this happens. And knowing that if this exists in our sexual contact with one another, our sexual intimacy, then it's going to create more hiding in the bedroom than it will connection. Okay? Also, your spouse can never live up to the fantasy that you have with it. I do think it's important to talk about fantasy with your spouse, but fantasy that fits within the agreed upon comfort of your sexual contact with each other. Okay? Not fantasy that goes outside of what God's plan for marriage is and what God's plan for sex is. And that is a discussion that if there's a question, it's important for you to talk about. And I would say if there's a lack of comfort about something somebody wants to bring into the bedroom, then it's better not to. Okay? Or talk about why and get to the root of it, or even see a counselor about it. But I would say also, in this, you won't be the lover that you want to be either. If you're living out of this objectification, because the fact that there's the human contact means that you're not going to do everything that you expect yourself to do. So this can be really damaging to relationships, and I think infidelity and pornography play a role in that. Infidelity also is a problem in our culture, because what happens is people get into a relationship where they're fulfilling their sexual desire in one place, and their emotional needs are being met in another, or their need for, somebody to take care of things around the house or whatever is being met, and then all of their other needs are being met over here. So two people are meeting all the needs of one person, and that isn't how it's designed to be. Okay? All right, so what is God's design for marriage, or for sex? Like I said earlier, it's oneness. I think when we are looking for oneness, connection, and knowing and being known, then this idea of pleasure seeking isn't as important. But if we don't know that that's what we're going to the bedroom for, then what else do you do but seek the pleasure of the moment? So do you remember when we talked about Genesis 3 and how Eve, when she saw the fruit, the scripture implies that she saw the fruit and she lusted after it, right? Like she wanted to consume it for her own benefit. She grasped for it and took it and then ate it. So the picture there is that Eve is reaching and grasping for something that is really only God's to give her. And that's at the core of what the sin is. The specific sin is disobedience to God. But the overarching problem is that she's grasping for something that's only God's to give. Okay? So when we talk about how, don't worry, I'm not doing diagrams. So this is husband and wife, right? This is God. When we talk about what happened in Genesis 3, there was separation here and here and there. And that means that man and woman started to pursue grasping for themselves what is only God's to give. That's at the core of this. And that is what I think happens when people follow the pleasure-seeking erotic sex, is they are grasping to get something that will never fulfill them. That God has created it to be for a different purpose. Right? And when it's cheapened, it's like grasping and taking something for yourself that God is saying, that's not going to fulfill you the way that you think it is. Okay? So, in thinking about that, open up to Matthew 4. Is everybody tired after lunch? I see a lot of half open eyes right now. Matthew 4, this is the temptation of Jesus. Remember when Scripture says that Jesus was tempted in every way? So it says, starting verse 1, Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. Jesus answered, It is written, Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. If you are the Son of God, he said, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and they will lift you up on their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against the stone. Jesus answered him, It is also written, Do not put the Lord your God to the test. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. All this I will give you, he said, if you will bow down and worship me. Jesus said to him, Away from me, Satan, for it is written, Worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him. So I think that this is the account of Jesus pushing back and reversing what happened in the garden. So there are a lot of similarities between this account and what we see happen with Adam and Eve in the garden. Okay? And I think that's important as we're talking about this, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But in 4:3, he talks about man shall not live on bread alone. So Satan says, hey, you're hungry, turn these stones into bread and eat. And Jesus says, no, I'm not going to do that. Why? Satan is tempting him by saying, hey, you fill yourself. And Jesus is saying, I'm not going to grasp for something and fill myself when it's God who needs to fill me. That's the temptation here. So this is the first example of what we see as a reversal of what happens in the garden. Okay? The next one is he takes him up on the highest point of the temple. And he says, throw yourself down. And Jesus says, no, I'm not going to put God to the test. What is Satan tempting him with here? Think about this. He's at the temple, okay? All the religious leaders of the day are standing there, down below, walking around. Imagine a man leaping from the highest point of the temple, angels swooping down and catching him, and everybody realizing, oh, that's Jesus. And all of a sudden, the claims that he's made about being the Son of God, they're validated. He's validated in front of all these people. Particularly the religious leaders. And Jesus is saying, no, I'm going to let God be the one who validates who I am.
Self-glorification.
What did you say?
It's telling him that it's self-glorification instead of bringing the glory of God.
That's right, yes. So Satan is saying, like, hey, prove to all these people who you are. And Jesus says, no, I'm not going to do that. And the last one is, if you'll just bow down to me, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. And Jesus says, no. The Bible says worship God alone. What's the temptation here? Satan is tempting Jesus, I think, to avoid having to die. I think he's saying, hey, look, you bow down right now, and you'll get everything you want. Because Jesus knew he was going to the cross. And when he says, away from me, Satan, this is a context clue here. He says, away from me, Satan. He says the very same thing to Peter in the same words, exact same Greek wording. Away from me, Satan. He says, away from me, Satan, to Peter, when Peter does what? What does Peter tell him?
You won't die.
You don't have to die. In both of those cases, the temptation to circumvent death, but also circumvent God's plan, Jesus is tempted by. Think about what happens to him in the garden. He's so distressed that he sweats blood. He didn't want to have to do it. But he did in obedience. We know he didn't want to do it because he said, God, take this cup from me, please. So, this reversal is profound in understanding what it is that Satan typically will do with us and how it pulls us away from what God intends. How quickly we can circumvent God's plan. I think that these things happen in relationships, in our relationships with each other. And I think we look for sex to fill us in ways sometimes that's never going to satisfy. We make it our idol. And God is saying, hey, look, it's not going to fulfill you if you're not connected with me. It's the connection that I want. And that's the connection that I want you to replicate in the bedroom. Okay? And I think that sex is a sacred act. Some people will argue with me on this, but I think it's a holy thing. Often we don't treat it that way, but I think it's a holy moment when two people are vulnerable with each other and they're physically exemplifying that naked and working towards not being ashamed, right? Working towards naked and unashamed. It is as close as you can get to that as possible. Now, I do want to say a couple things. I think that we have to be careful because it's possible to not experience mutual vulnerability in the context of sex. And in those moments, it may feel like a disconnection, right? And that's okay. Like, remember, we're talking about the ideal. We're not talking about this is what you're going to experience every time you go to the bedroom. But I do think that we need to be having these experiences with one another where we do feel that acceptance and that being known part of intimacy on both sides, because I think that the depth of that connection is truly profound when it is what God created it to be. Now you can know in the bedroom without being known. What does that look like? So that's one half of what we talk about in intimacy. So you can know what your partner wants, but you may have an inability to communicate what you want. So this goes back to those core desires. If you can't talk about what feels good or express yourself in the bedroom, that means that you are not allowing yourself to be known. Okay? You can also be known without knowing. You can express your desires but not be willing to hear your partner's desires in the bedroom. And that is also, makes it difficult for there to be the depth of intimacy that we're talking about. So knowing and being known means both people are mutually expressing their desires, what they enjoy, and carrying a playful, joyful attitude that says, man, this is awesome, right? Okay, give me some feedback. What are you guys hearing? What are you thinking as we're talking about this stuff? Or is everybody like, oh, I'm not going to speak up on this one?
I think it's really important, to have that level of vulnerability, to be able to share with each other, because, not only is there the critical aspect of that connection and that mutual vulnerability, but even for the sexual experience, you need to feel safe in that, because it is such a vulnerable place, and if you're not sharing that, you could be crossing boundaries that your partner has, or you could be allowing some of your own boundaries to be crossed, and that can establish distrust in a relationship.
That's right.
I guess we could kind of talk about how, earlier, we were talking about the objectification, and, is it like a mutual agreement kind of thing, that's just so, it's just so critical, just for the safety of the relationship.
That's right, yeah. And that goes back to that safety and belonging that we were talking about earlier, which I will say I've worked with couples that some things have been violated in the bedroom, and it did damage that safety and belonging, even years after that violation happened. It was difficult for them to get past, and so building trust back there has been super important. But yeah, thank you for saying that. Other thoughts? Need some interaction.
I appreciate you talking about that oneness being the real thing we're striving for. It's like the only life we have is when we know God, and then everything fits in around that.
Yeah.
And He gave us all this good stuff around that. And if we take this good thing and then put it up in that place and start pursuing it, it's just not good anymore. But we were created for that purpose.
Yeah.
So that really is the only thing that's going to fulfill, really, I guess,
you triggered a thought in my head that seeking pleasure alone in the bedroom is like only wanting to have incredible worship that makes you have chills down your spine. In a good way. You get the chills and you feel all emotionally hyped up, but it's not about, the chills are not from connecting with God, they're from the music is moving you, right?
I heard a term is this commodity, not only in terms of sex, but in this context, it's like you're looking at the other person as a commodity that's going to give you something that you want.
That's right.
And the world, they're trying to, you hear about objectification in a non-Christian thing, in context, and saying that this is wrong. But on the other hand, their view of sex is that it is a commodity, something that you're getting from somebody else for your pleasure. So it's never going to be able to be rectified in a non-Christian context.
That's right.
They're contradicting themselves.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Well, to add on to that, discussing commodities, that's not just in today's culture, that's also when you look at the overly restrictive view. If it's strictly for procreation, then it's, we are only doing this to achieve a child. We are only doing this so that you can give me a baby, or I can give you, you are objectifying it in that way. You're treating sex as a commodity.
That's true. Yeah, so whether it's totally restrictive or totally open, it's a commodity on either end. That's good.
We've talked about things that can hinder it, and I'm just wondering, would you point back to session 2 and being things that lead towards that oneness, connecting our core to our spouse's core, things like that?
Absolutely.
Are there other things that you could point out other than avoiding obstacles and outside of just that connecting through core to core? Are there other things that you think promote oneness, whether just individually within our relationship or even things from outside of our relationship that can push us together?
Absolutely. That kind of goes a little bit back to what you were asking me after the last session. And I'm going to really hit on that. I'm going to have her ask a question at the last session that's going to help. But particularly as it applies to sex, I am going to make some suggestions here. These are some things that you can do in a physical way that can enhance the oneness and the connection you're experiencing. Okay? First one is eye contact. Keeping eye contact with your partner is super important, especially during sex. And I know that is like, oh man, that can be hard, but it's easy to just go somewhere else in your mind, close your eyes, whatever, but staying connected and keeping eye contact maintains vulnerability. Okay? Another one would be, and I've said this a couple times, staying playful, meaning you can laugh at yourself. Or you can laugh with your partner. Sex can be so serious sometimes that if we're not playful, or if we don't maintain that real lighthearted attitude, then it can just be like, oh man, this is just this heavy, I don't know, not fun experience. I would say also being willing to talk and connect before you start entering into the sexual moment. So I would say don't just be about getting down to business time, right? Talk and connect with one another beforehand.
Like emotional foreplay?
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. Foreplay to the foreplay. But I think emotionally, that is what we're seeking, right? That connection emotionally then leads us into having a physical connection that really enhances things very well.
What
I saw
about
some people
setting,
laughing when we said foreplay.
setting some warnings? You don't want to be talking about it and then, there's just a good time for things. Especially when you're in that vulnerable moment, you hate to be like, nah,
What, can you say that
You're
again?
talking about talking beforehand, you know, I just think that's important to have those conversations beforehand because sometimes you're just more vulnerable, obviously, in a vulnerable
Yeah.
situation in the moment.
That's right. And one person may be more of a talker than the other, right? Like, you know, like, feel like we need to talk and connect before we connect. Here's another one that is super important, and people hate this. But you need to plan to have sex regularly. And so why do people hate that? Why do people hate it when we say you need to plan a night or something? That's right. Sex is supposed to be spontaneous, and it's more exciting and fun if it's spontaneous because it's raw and passionate and it's great, right? You can plan a sexual encounter with each other and still have that level of excitement. But guess what? If we expect it to be passionate and awesome every single time, we're gonna have our, we're gonna be let down because it's not gonna be. Go ahead.
Does that glorification or high holding of spontaneity relate some to our chasing of the erotic?
Yes, that's exactly why we push back. I think that is probably our most common mistake, especially in the church. I mean, I hear people say, we are not going to plan sex. We are not going to, because they think it will totally take away from it. And I would say, well, then you're just not going to have sex very often. Honestly, I mean, now there are the rare exceptions of people that do, but a healthy sexual relationship is having sex 2 to 3 times a week on average. Now, if you have children, 1 to 2 times a week may be, a little more feasible, but less than that. And I'm not trying to make anybody feel like their sexual relationship is bad because it has as much to do with what you're satisfied with as anything else. But making sure that you're connecting sexually at least 1 time a week is extremely important. Even if that feels like, oh, I don't know how to do that. We've got so much going on, and the kids, when we get them in bed, we're just exhausted. And I would say, put them down a little early, 1 night a week, or let them read a book in their room.
Amen to that.
Put them down early 2 to 3 times a week. I don't know, whatever. Here's another one, and this is very practical, but this is important. Don't expect great sex. I'm just going to stop writing. After a dinner date. You're laughing because you know it's true, right? Or maybe it's just because that's so practical, it's like, what the heck? Here's the thing, most people think, okay, if we're gonna have sex, it's probably gonna happen when we go to a movie and we go out to dinner afterward and all that. And I'm gonna tell you, you're gonna be full, you're gonna be sleepy, and it's gonna feel more like a chore than something you're excited about. That's why planning sex, instead of waiting for the right moment, is important. And there's been research done around this, that people will rate their satisfaction with the sexual experience after a date lower than if they had a planned sexual experience at home, like on a regular weekend. Because they're not over full, they haven't drank a bunch of Coke, or whatever, I don't know, eating a huge steak, and now they're like, oh, let's go. Right? But relying on this is what happens to a lot of people. They think, okay, we're going on a date in a week or whatever, we'll do it then, when we have a babysitter. Get a babysitter on your sex night, if you want to, right?
Babysitter's Club. It's an inside
That's
joke.
weird. Hey, listen.
And now nobody
gonna hear the babysitters club.
So Sarah, that
Look, the
October
blue
thing.
ribbon, I know.
And all the people who don't have kids at home anymore can take all the
All of them, every single.
If you don't have any, it probably changes
Yes.
around about one.
What was the question? She said, can you address gender differences in sex?
Not like, what's the difference?
She's a nurse, right?
Let's go ahead and read the Moses story. And
Those stick figures weren't enough.
you're a nurse. We only have 4 minutes left.
Was that what we talked about the difference between men and women?
Oh, yeah. Is it okay if we go a little bit over?
Yes, please.
Okay.
More sex talk.
Captivated.
We love it.
All right. So, this is gonna be a little bit more. I'm comfortable with talking about these things, and it seems like you guys are okay. So, I'm gonna talk about arousal templates. Okay, what that means is this: men's arousal template is like this. No, that's not right. It's the wrong way. It's the wrong way. It's like this. Okay? So, arousal, and then orgasm, and then this is a refractory period, and this is usually about 20 minutes. And I know you may not have been asking this exactly, but I'm gonna use this to talk about gender differences. Okay, and women is like this. Okay? And there is no refractory period for women. Sometimes there is. Refractory means how long it takes for a rest before the arousal phase can start over again. Okay? So, what's interesting is when men approach sex from the perspective of getting what they want, this is what their chemistry is telling them. Okay? Whereas women, their chemistry is saying, no, slow down. This is what I want. This is what I need. So this is the arousal phase for women that then peaks and then goes down. So why would I share that with you? The important thing here is that when you talk about gender differences, when we're driven by what our innate desire is, and we're not concerned with our spouse, what we want in the bedroom looks very different. Right? And when we talked about communication and talking the foreplay before the foreplay, right? The emotional foreplay, as you coined that. That's yours. I'll borrow it from you in my book. Communication about foreplay is going to be in this area right here as the arousal phases start to go. But there should be communication on the front end that's just like playful talk. It doesn't even have to be connected to sex, but men often struggle more with not wanting to do that because they want to go straight to the act. Okay? So men need to remember that there has to be communication and plenty of time for it on the front end. But communication just isn't in this space. You also need to be communicating all along the way. But the communication changes, right? It goes from, these are the things that we want to do, as you're exciting each other, into, this is what feels good. This is what I like, or I don't like that. Those things are really important to have a healthy sex life, because a lot of people endure things that they don't enjoy because they're afraid of hurting their spouse's feelings. And a lot of women just are like, okay, let's just get it over with because the communication piece is not there. Okay? So it's important to keep this in mind as you're trying to work to meet each other's needs, not just your own needs. And knowing that connection happens in this space right here. Okay? And afterward. Actually, it's interesting. There's a neurotransmitter, oxytocin, that is released. For women, it has to be released before sex. So oxytocin is happening here for women. Oxytocin is the neurotransmitter that is released when we feel connected to each other. And for men, oxytocin is released like down here during the refractory period. So men feel connected after sex, women need to feel connected before sex. It's biologically based. They found the neurotransmitter that's the culprit for that. Okay? All right, so does that answer some of the gender differences stuff? Or
That's great information. No, I was leaning more towards just kind of going back to the second mission, about all the different ways of oneness and being known for the core and giving each other grace. With the fact that men may want oneness way more often than women may want
physical oneness, yeah. Yes.
And giving each other grace and being vulnerability about, I really think vulnerability in this arena is can be looked at as like a gift you're giving each other, and the other arenas too, but it's a gift you're giving your partner.
That's right.
And like I heard a quote once in I'm not sure, but it was written for women, and it was talking about sex lives and being here for your husband. One of the quotes that I love, and I try to share with other people, it said, don't be afraid to be naked in front of your husband. You're the only naked woman he's allowed to see. And I just thought about that gift that women want to just cover up, and we're so concerned about our own feelings and not thinking about what we're giving our husband and what we require our husband to see. Yeah, I'm the only naked person woman is allowed to see. So it's a harsh restriction that I put on him, and that I don't want to give him what I'm able to do. So giving each other grace back and forth in the bedroom is just as important as the other stuff.
That is, yeah, I mean, I don't have to say anything else because you said it all. That was great. So, but I will say that what happens in the bedroom, I'm using a big word here, is isomorphic to what happens in your everyday life and vice versa. You can notice how you treat each other in your day-to-day is similar to how you treat each other in the bedroom. And so if you're practicing reflecting this oneness, this grace in the bedroom, it should translate into your everyday life and vice versa. Now, I will say that the traditionally held belief is that women desire sex less than men do, right? The reality is that that's not totally true. But it is typical that one of the people in the relationship desires sex more than the other. Especially as couples get older, for a period, women will typically desire it more, and men start to desire it less because of physiology. Okay. So the reason I'm saying that is I want everybody to recognize everybody's sexual appetite is unique. And it is pretty common that we hear men want sex more than women do, but it isn't always the case. Sometimes there are women who enjoy sex and want it more often than their partner does. So, but the point is recognizing who wants that physical connection more than the other, and the person who doesn't can be in a position of power if they want to use it in the wrong way. they can use it in a negative way to say, I'm gonna withhold, like maybe internally, you're not meeting my emotional needs, so I'm gonna withhold sex from you. And I think that's a dangerous game to play with each other. I think it's important for us to recognize, like you said, each person's body is the other person's. You belong to one another. And if you're hurting, you need to say you're hurting instead of punishing through withholding sex. So it's important to continue to give grace and to meet each other's needs and to know what those needs are. But we do such a poor job a lot of times of talking about what our needs are that we consistently miss each other. Okay? All right. What else? Any other thoughts? No?
Do you have any kind of book that you would suggest for people to be able to maybe work through to be able to communicate better?
Yes.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. I do. Let me write this down so you guys can have it right now. Take a picture of it. It's called The Celebration of Sex. And it is by, what is his name?
The bow tie guy?
Yes.
Doug Rosenau.
Doug Rosenau, yeah.
Not well enough.
You got a copy in the office if you want to borrow it.
Do not, don't buy Bill Nye. That's not gonna be like sex. Celebration of sex. I think another good one, another great book on marriage is Timothy Keller's The Meaning of Marriage. I don't know if y'all have ever read that, but it is awesome. To me, it's the best book on marriage out there. But Doug Rosenau has the sexual